I'm curious because I've also watched the documentary that involved Gilbert Arenas. I actually am really curious to kind of get his thoughts up on this one, but we know the NBA, been a lot of action in the offseason, lots of moves. But joining us to discuss it in the D.C. area, you hear him all the time, and talking about the Washington Wizards, Ben Strober joins us here on the... Now, we know you got the Washington Commanders colors up and in there, and see, there's already positive hopes that, hey, they're going to get something done up from here. But you know, Ben, it is interesting when I look at the NBA and a lot of just the movements that happen. I mean, KD going to Houston and a bunch of others, you know, and then there's these talks about LeBron James could potentially be up and on the move. Nothing set in stone yet. But we know that like the NBA and what we watched last season is you watched two small market teams go head to head in the finals. One of them made it all the way to the mountain. So when you think about that, does it kind of give you a boost of confidence and then some reassurance, even when covering the Washington Wizards, as long as you have, that maybe Washington, they look at it like, hey, the Pacers are looking good. The Magic ended up making up some moves. So it's like, why not us? Has there been some kind of like, has that kind of lingered on the back of Wizards fans' minds, you know, looking at that and what we got last season?
Yeah, absolutely. If you take a look at what Oklahoma City did this year, the 68 wins capped off by an NBA championship, that gives you reassurance as a Wizards fan because Will Dawkins, the new, not even that new general manager, now it's been 2 years since he took over the helm to clean up the disaster that was left by the previous two regimes under Ernie Grunfeld and Tommy Shepard. He comes right off that Sam Presti tree, and he has instilled a lot of the same mentalities, a lot of the same strategies that we have seen from Sam Presti in Oklahoma City. You know, one of the aspects we see is guys who will play 2 to 3 years in the summer league. And throughout the Wizards summer league, we always saw the guys play in about 2 games. A lot of the second-year guys like Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George. But I think there's a lot to look forward to with this Wizards organization because the Thunder took a very similar trajectory. You spend a couple years in the bottom, and essentially what you do at this point when you're in the NBA, the way you have to do it is you have to find a direction, and the direction for the Thunder was the youth movement, and they became the youngest team, I think, in history, if I'm not wrong about that, to win an NBA Finals, and the Wizards have one of the youngest teams in the NBA right now. I think they have 12 guys between the age of 19 and 24 years old. You have 9 former first-round picks from the last 3 years. I think 8 now, actually, after Blake Wesley was waived a couple days ago. But the Wizards have done exactly what needed to happen for such a long time, which was to tear everything down and just actually have a sense of direction through rebuilding and trying to establish a young core like the Wizards have. And not to say that it's 100% going to work, because it might not. Some of these guys might pan out. You could make the argument that the Wizards don't have a superstar player on the roster yet. And we know in the NBA how important that is, with the Thunder, of course, find a gem trading for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who becomes the MVP and the Finals MVP. Do the Wizards have that kind of player yet? It's too early to tell, but I like the direction that Washington has taken. And I think some of the examples we've seen, like Indiana's run this past year in Oklahoma City, does give you a little bit extra hope that the Wizards are trending the right way right now.
So I've seen, you know, with some veterans that are up and in this roster with CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton. And, you know, because looking at Alex Sarr, I think the kid does have, you know, the potential, and especially at the size that he's at, you know, he's going to be that 4 that, you know, is really going to tear things up from the defensive side and then giving you the added points from within the perimeter. So to add, you know, the veteran, at least the veteran experience and presence up from here, because the most important thing in what we've watched is that, I mean, we got more physical play, especially with the hand checks, which I enjoy that because it makes basketball really interesting. So with watching that, and then even seeing just this roster in particular and what the game plan will be for this upcoming season, because we know with the summer leagues going on, youngsters, you got draft picks right now trying to work their way in on this roster. So seeing that and having these vets like Middleton and like McCollum, this is going to give them the step to where we got the right guys that are going to at least take the right kinds of shots and open looks, but then also add a little bit more of that physicality and defense to where it will allow the Wizards, from what they were last year, to hopefully maybe making themselves a little bit more in the middle of the pack this upcoming season, right?
Yeah, one thing to note with this Wizards team is a first round pick, a top 8 protected pick is what the Wizards currently hold, but that does go to the New York Knicks if the Wizards do finish in a position that takes them out of the top 8. So finishing bottom 4 in the league would guarantee them a top 8 pick. Of course, they don't have to necessarily finish in the bottom 4. They could luck out in the lottery, which never seems to happen here in Washington, but you could still be excited about getting Trey Johnson, of course. I think what they have right now on the roster, and the veterans are going to play such a key piece, not because they're going to win you a bunch of ball games, because I don't think this team is going to win a lot of games next year. I do think they're going to improve. I would expect that win total to go up from 18. I'd say they win around like 24 to 25 games would be a good season, because you can make the argument that if they don't win more games this year, if you don't see key development from some of the young players you have, then that's not really a successful season. I know that the front office doesn't really have the interest of losing that top 8 protected pick, because they had Will Dawkins on the ESPN broadcast during the summer league, and they asked him, they said, hey, Will, the East is in a very advantageous situation for a lot of these teams right now because of all the star players that are currently going to be out for the season, and everyone seems to be down right now. Is there any chance you guys flirt with the play-in? And very diplomatically, he said that they had no interest in losing the top 8 pick. He said, we want to get to where we believe this organization can get to, but we don't want to take any shortcuts. We don't want to skip any steps in that. And I think another year of bottoming out and having the development throughout the regular season is what's in the cards for Washington right now. Now, the year after that, when they hopefully add another super talented player to the roster next year, and tough news for Elijah Arenas, a guy that was definitely on the radar for Wizards fans, actually, given the ties with Gilbert. And then he was probably going to be one of the top picks in the draft next year, potentially. He'll be out for the year with a torn, I think it was meniscus that they reported just like 15 minutes ago. But if you get one of those talented guys in the draft and pair that along, hopefully you see development out of Alex Sarr, as you mentioned. He needs to get more physical around the rim and be the kind of beast that he can, because there's at times where he'll get down there and he finds himself in a good position, but he's just, he just kind of lacks the mentality. He's a little bit too soft down there at times. And I think that's one thing that needs to change. But if they get development from all those guys, find the key pieces they think that can be there for them long-term, that'll allow them to really make some moves in the offseason, because they're going to have a ton of financial flexibility as well. When they made the trade to deal away Sadiq Bey and Jordan Poole a month ago, that essentially was a move that took away $80 million off their books next offseason. They'll have $100 million in cap space to work with. And not to say they're going to go out there and sign a bunch of free agents, because that kind of era of the NBA is almost dead at this point. I think free agency isn't quite what it used to be. But the Wizards will once again be a hub at the deadline where they can trade for some less favorable contracts from organizations that are trying to dump them. They can acquire more assets like first-round picks or whatever picks they use. And now we can put a premium on second-round picks. We saw that Washington was able to use 2 of those second-round picks they had acquired in a couple different trades to get a super young, talented piece in Cam Whitmore, who gets to come back home and play. He's from Maryland, so that's a pretty cool story that they'll get him back, one of the more young, talented offensive pieces in the league. Don't know what his role is going to look like, but there's a lot to look forward to. And even though they're not going to win a lot of games next year, I'm looking forward to seeing the excitement from the young guys night in, night out.
So it's interesting, and I'm actually glad that you shifted it up onto this area, because of the fact that just the area of the NBA we can see is vastly changing, and where you start to see a lot of these young teams who rely on getting into the top 8 in the draft picks and getting the youngsters to build them, develop them, and even if you go and you trade away a star of what the Thunder did with trading away Paul George, they get SGA out of the Clippers, and people are thinking did the Clippers make a mistake on that? I'm like, no. The whole point of it was you wanted to get another star. That's what Kawhi wanted. So at that point, you start looking at the slow growth and build of the young youth, and now you're starting to see teams like that are really building and developing. Pacers got speed. The Thunder, they've extended a lot of their youngsters, and they've got their 3-4 best players up from there. So I just feel like we've shifted towards to where we obviously want veteran leadership, no doubt about it, but you also do want to have the youth to where you got the minutes, you got the defense, you got the shots and points. But when I start looking at it, even from college hoops, because I love watching college basketball every year up in March when the tournament comes on, and because with the NIL and the transfer portal as well, it works perfectly for college football because every year I always know that there's going to be a day one player ready to play or somebody that's going to fit my 53-man roster. But when I look at the state of the NBA, players now are going to be coming back into college, not just particularly for NIL money, but because some of them, they want more of the experience. They want to be more prepared coming in the NBA. So when I think about this, I think we're going to come to a point where, I mean, I look at the NBA lottery draft and I'm like, do we even need this thing? If the talent gets better in the pool, like how we're looking at the NFL, maybe the NBA, these draft picks up at some point will hold a little more of a bigger value somewhere down up into the future. Is that kind of something that they're looking forward to in this Adam Silver type of, situation that we'll look at in the future of the NBA?
Yeah, because I feel like we're starting to put more of a premium on second round picks in the NBA. And just growing up, I'm a young kid, 21 years old. Second round picks were pretty much an afterthought. You never even really heard about the dudes that were taken in the second round. You mostly would stash them on your G League roster. They'd play there for a couple of years. Sometimes they make it and become great players. I know Jokic is the best example of that, one of the best players ever, drafted during a Taco Bell commercial or whatever the lore is behind that. But now that it's a real possibility, you grab super talented players in the second round. I think one thing the Wizards actually did in this draft that I really enjoyed was you take a flyer on a guy that's 24 years old, and Jameer Watkins, who was their second round pick out of Florida State. And a lot of guys now that come out of college, you either play 1 year and you're like an 18, 19-year-old fresh young pup, you go right to the NBA to try to develop because you have a lot of potential there, or you stay in college because it's genuinely really hard to get significant minutes at a legit program now as an 18 or 19-year-old because of NIL and because of the way things shape up with the transfer portal. You saw the Auburn starting lineup this year in March Madness, team of the final. Everyone was 23 or 24 years old. So I just don't know how you're supposed to even compete with that as an 18-year-old fresh out of high school. Now that you have guys that are 23, 24 trying to make it in the league, and there's kind of the age discrimination factor to it, but these are dudes that seriously can play. So there is significant value to taking these guys in the second round because you could make the argument they're already a little more polished than some of the guys that might go in the first round just based on potential. They might not have as high as a ceiling as the guys that would go in the first round, but if you're a team that's in a kind of win now position, you already have some key pieces there, but you're looking for someone that will give you some 3-point shooting off the bench right away, like an absolute assassin from deep. You could take one of those guys in the second round, slot them into the role you want them, and they could be perfectly serviceable right there in the NBA. So I think that's kind of the way it shifted due to the changing era of college basketball. And I'm glad the Wizards made a decision to take a flyer on a guy that was pretty experienced and polished as a defender, just not as much offensively. That'll be a work in progress for Jameer Watkins, but really good stuff from him in the summer league defensively, led the entire circuit there in steals per game with 4.
So I want to ask you this, and I'm curious of it. Now, we know that obviously very knowledgeable in the basketball world. And so, you guys have the Washington Mystics up and out there for the WNBA. And, I look at this as a growing sport the same way that I look at with the NHL. I think, the Four Nations tournament was fantastic. The fact that they drew the amount of ratings that they did, and people loved that. When you get players passionate, playing for their countries, it's a totally different feel. And they land a new TV deal with Canada, and then there's a possibility of new expansion teams down the horizon. So the WNBA, they're at this growing point, but I feel like that there's a part of it that it's like people want to have the credit for themselves in some ways because of like the whole Caitlin Clark effect. To me personally, I just look at it this way, and watching basketball as we have. I mean, we felt this way about the nostalgia with Michael Jordan because Michael was so iconic. Nobody really knew how to really contain it or defend it or any of that. And then it was just like, instead of like really kind of throwing shades, we want to embrace it. I mean, the Jordan brand, the Air Nikes, and it was just like basketball had a style. It had a flavor to it. For the WNBA with the Caitlin Clark thing, to me, she's remarkable. She's a great player. And I feel like it's really going to change the whole platform of the WNBA for the next few years. But my takeaway of it is we know that there's going to be new money. We know the CBA is going to obviously change and grow pretty vastly, and these women do deserve the contracts that they get. But my big thing is that when you look at someone like Caitlin Clark, in my opinion, I look at it as more of an asset than I look of it as, well, before she even got here, we had players. I'm like, we're aware of that, but it's like she's the pillar that's really causing the jump to now get larger. So when you look at this of the growth of a sport, because in my opinion, I want to be able to support the valuable asset that I have that I know is going to affect many of these young athletes around this league, to where I got shoe deals, I got endorsements, I'm in commercials, I'm getting bigger contracts. So when you think about that, and even with just the Mystics, and it's like, will that eventually, like, because I think they need to get it. I think they need to get it together. They're going to get paid. The money's going to come up. What has been kind of your thoughts in this situation? Because to me, I would hate for a growing sport to not know how to really get this in line to where now the officiating's better, and then all the players, they're getting all of their cuts because of that one valuable asset.
It's such like a cut and dry issue for me, because it's just there's so many different ways to look at it. And I'm really glad you brought up the value that Caitlin Clark has brought to the sport, because there was an article, maybe it was in The Athletic, I can't really remember, but they had economists really check out exactly how much she was worth to the WNBA, and they determined that Caitlin Clark was worth $1 billion to the WNBA. Like, she had generated $1 billion worth of revenue based on everything she does for the association. So that's just remarkable in itself, nonetheless, of how good she is, and why she's the transcending talent that really took over the sport and made it into what it is the past couple of years. And now you've got some flavor with the other players that have also come in the upbringing, and people have taken notice of that. I think Clark was a pivotal part of that, because people started to notice women's basketball as a sport. And there's always been a ton of talent in the WNBA. It's just been overlooked. There wasn't the star that the sport necessarily needed to get things going, for people to notice some of the other best players that were part of the association. As for what happens with the CBA, I don't really have like a clear answer of what I think really is the solution there, but I've been keeping up with the Mystics this year for sure. Obviously, the ownership group here for the Washington Wizards is also the ownership group that's in charge of the Mystics. So it's been great to see the way they've kind of gone through a similar looking rebuild to the Wizard. And, I've been to some of the games. They've drawn some really good crowds out there. People have definitely taken interest in the team and the town. And I've been excited with what they've been able to do. They're definitely ahead of schedule right now. I believe they're in a position where they'd actually make the postseason. So I think that'd be really great for the city, great for the sport, because I think Washington, D.C. is a place where women's basketball really can thrive due to the demographics that we have in the nation's capital here. And I think the proof is in the pudding right now with people being interested in the team. So hopefully the WNBA, as over the years go on, can kind of get everything figured out, so everything can remain smooth and the league can continue to grow the way it has. Because for a long time, I think first 30 or so years of the NBA or whatever it was, the league struggled until it got the star players that it needed eventually down the road, and the NBA skyrocketed into the empire it is now. And you just hope that you could see a similar trajectory with the WNBA here over the next couple of years. I mean, the expansion is great. I know someone personally that's a Mystics fan because he went to school with me at the University of Maryland, but he's from Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is going to get a team in 2030. So he'll jump ship and become a fan of them in 2030. But I think that's great that they're going to have expansion, and people are already taking notice and interest in that.
And it's interesting because it's like we have the Sixers for as long as we have, and I'm just like, I'm surprised we never even had a WNBA team in Philadelphia, because I'm like, that's going to add a little bit more into the culture and such. And so, it's been drawing up a crowd. In fact, me being a Vegas born and now living up in Colorado, I mean, I've been to an Aces game when they played the Liberty, and it was stacked of a house because of two competitive teams, and the women were just absolutely just on fire on the court, offensively, defensively. So hopefully in a growing sport, they'll really get things together. One last thing before we let you go and shift on. So I've had such an enjoyment with with documentaries that I've watched up on Netflix, and more particularly on Untold. I mean, they've had fantastic, documentaries. But I watched and I was evaluating on, and I remember this as a kid when this ended up happening, but the Gilbert Arenas story. I remember when it hit the news, and to me, I loved watching Gilbert Arenas playing up and on the court with Washington because it was just that the Wizards needed something, and like I even remember having an old school, and you'll love this. I had a old school Washington Bullets Chris Webber jersey. And
Okay, yeah.
and so like they needed something that was really going to help out where, I mean, you already had the Capitals where with Alex Ovechkin, they were going to be fine for years. And then obviously, from Redskins to Commanders, they've had a culture and we know that they've been kind of up and down, but now it seems like they've gotten things under control. Mm-hmm. So at that timeline, Gilbert Arenas was a rising star. Unfortunately, things didn't work out with the Lakers and then comes to Washington and is like, it's a breath of fresh air for Wizard fans. Like we could finally be on the map. We're finally getting competitive. And I loved what they were doing up from there. But then watching all through the documentary, Ben, it was just really interesting. And it taps me back into when that first happened. And I'm just like, my thing is, obviously, if you had with the coaching up and involved in getting players straightened out, it would have been a completely different situation where we would have never had to gone through this type of scenario. So when you look at that documentary and just how you evaluated that in your best of terms, like how this situation could have been handled and how it really changed a bit of that trajectory of the Wizards organization when that happened.
So this is like a story, obviously, that I remember from when I was really, really young because I don't even remember in relation what exact year it was. And I haven't even had the chance to watch the full documentary. I've just kind of seen the bits and pieces of it. But I know that the organization for so long, really until the last couple of years when the new front office came in led under Michael Winger, Will Dawkins, Travis Schlenk, and all those guys came in. The organization was a complete mess. There was a lot of dysfunction. I think there was too much of an input from ownership for so many years, and it led to so many bad decisions being made and the organization mishandling a ton of things over the past couple of years, with that really being a testament of the way the organization was at one point. And, just like thinking back on Gilbert Arenas and what his impact was, like you said, it was a breath of fresh air for people in DC because this is a basketball town really at heart, and football is the name of the game. Everybody talks football 24/7 in the DC area. It runs everything. It always has, and it always will. But when basketball is buzzing in the nation's capital, like you will feel that. You will feel that maybe even more so than the Capitals the last 20 years, which is really hard to do because the Capitals have been the pinnacle of success throughout every single year. I mean, they consistently have found themselves in the playoffs, have a transcending talent who became the all-time leading goal scorer. But in the NBA, just you think back to some of those years when you had the big three and Butler, Jameson, and Arenas, and then years later after that, the core that they built around John Wall and Bradley Beal. The Wizards were a really fun and lively organization around the city. There was a lot of buzz about them. And unfortunately, as things kind of came crashing down, at first it was with the whole Arenas thing, and then the organization kind of had to reset from there. Got lucky. They win the lottery, get John Wall, which gave them the spark they needed to get back to where they wanted to be 4 or 5 years after that. But after Wall got hurt, and then they gave Beal the worst contract in history, you kind of see how dull things could get. I mean, we had MVP chance for Bronny James in Capital One Arena last year to show really how low things had gotten. You hope you're going to get to a better place, but it shows you what star players can do for an organization the way Gilbert Arenas did. And I know this is not really the exact answer to exactly what you were talking about, how they handled that situation, but everything was just a nightmare. Top to bottom within the Wizards organization at that point. And I think that's been pretty clear to most people that have followed the NBA for years and years. But it's just a sad story overall because of, what he was able to do for Wizard fandom at the time and how quickly it crashed down after that. And then the injuries, of course, made his contract one of the worst in NBA history at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I always kind of ask myself of like, what could have been, if something that if that situation never happened, I mean, how this roster and how the team itself, could we have eventually seen this team, make a finals run, and so it often, sometimes when things like that really kind of hit, it's like now you're kind of stuck with what now. And then with the John Wall situation, I remember that big hype, coming out of Kentucky and how they played. And so, yeah, it's like usually it's always about how you recover even after a situation like that. And so, and like we said, we're always hoping that teams often get better every single year. And then even with youth movement, with a team that, kind of fell short, but they're willing to rebound back. And so, yeah, there's always room for improvement, and I'm excited for what, the upcoming season will look like for him. But Ben, appreciate you for coming on by, man. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And for our audiences here, tapping in and locking in where people can find out all of your content on the Washington Wizards all season long.
Yeah, you can check us out on Locked On Wizards on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And then you can follow me on Twitter as well at Ben Strober Media. And then our show page on Twitter is just Locked On Wizards. Jake, appreciate you having me on. Great work you're doing over here, and let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely, man. Always down to do so. Take care of yourself, man. Enjoy the rest of the week. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too.